Ladies and gentlemen, dear shareholders, I welcome you to the 2020 Eurazeo Shareholders meeting. Thank you for taking part. Thank you for your loyalty. Thank you for taking part in this shareholders meeting, which is truly a first. First of all, it's highly unusual because it's 100% digital. We don't have the physical presence of our shareholders. Of course, this is being broadcast on our website, the company's website. This is also unprecedented because the chairman of the supervisory board, Mr. Michel David-Veil, currently abroad, and due to the health lockdown, he was not able to attend today, much to his regret, will be sending a message to us today. I would like to thank Mr. Jean-Charles Decaux, Vice Chairman of the company's Supervisory Board, for accepting to chair the meeting this year. Presiding over the session, with no further ado, I'll give the floor to Mr. Jean-Charles Decaux. Thank you, Madam Chairman, dear Virginie, dear shareholders. First of all, welcome to the 2020 Eurazeo Shareholders meeting, being held in such unusual circumstances. As Virginie said, it's unprecedented. As Mr. Chairman David-Veil can't be here to chair and has asked me to chair in his stead. As Vice Chairman of the Supervisory Board at Eurazeo, of course, I accepted to shoulder this responsibility. I know how important these annual meetings are to him. He's been loyal to these for 2 decades now. And of course, we prepared this AGM carefully together with him. If I might say a few words of introduction, my first word is a thank you, a word of thanks to the managers, to all employees of Eurazeo, not only for the tremendous mobilization they've shown since the beginning of the crisis that the entire world is having to cope with, but also thanks to the quality of management relationships they had with all companies in the portfolio as of day one after lockdown. Over the past 8 weeks, the supervisory board at Eurazeo has been informed on a weekly basis in a detailed fashion, also regularly consulted on all aspects pertaining to the group. Shareholders, I'd also like to recall the special features of our shareholdings and our strengths at our company. We've got a sound foundation of shareholders, family shareholders, including Jean Decaux shareholding that I'm representing today. We are long-term shareholders. We're very much involved in Eurazeo governance through our active contribution at the supervisory board meetings. We have a majority of independent members. We also attend many of the different committee meetings. We work together very closely. So we have all three: confidence, trust, and transparency. That's a real pillar of the relationship that the company has with the shareholders. A last point, I would like to express the supervisory board's confidence in the strategy, the group's ability to weather this period. Eurazeo is a long-term investment company with a sound foundation. It has all the financial assets to contain crisis impacts, thanks to the soundness of its balance sheet, absence of debt, and the support of its partner investors. Financial discipline is very strict, both in terms of investments and coordinating costs. That will guide their actions in this unprecedented crisis. Eurazeo will have to demonstrate its fleet-footedness, its nimbleness to move on opportunities as they arise, all the while providing for added value through various areas, digital, CSR, and many different topics that are becoming ever more important for business after business. Let's go through customary points. In these very unusual circumstances of a closed session, as per the current regulations, the Eurazeo management executive on 30 April 2020 appointed Olivier May and Philippe Audouin to stand as tellers, serve as tellers. We would like to thank them for accepting the position. I would suggest Nicolas Huet be appointed. He's General Secretary of Eurazeo. I suggest we appoint him as Secretary for the AGM. I'd like to hand over to him now to go through the legal formalities. Thank you, Jean-Charles. Ladies and gentlemen, shareholders, the combined Eurazeo AGM meeting held today after a notice published in the official journal 23 March and the invitation to attend on 15 April, which was also published in the official journals, as well as attendance letters sent out electronically and by mail 15 April to every shareholder, registered shareholder. bearer shareholders and other shareholders were duly convened to the meeting as per regulations. The AGM is being broadcast live, as Virginie said, from its HQ, as per an ordinance dated 25 March, which amends the way shareholders' meetings can be held. On our desk, we have the documents that have been made available to shareholders as per legislation. No shareholder used their right to add an additional point or a resolution to the agenda. Proxy votes have been sent in, and votes came in until yesterday 3 p.m. The final quorum checked by a bailiff, Mathieu Mina Asperti, 76.35% of shares. Therefore, the AGM is duly convened. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Nicolas. Now I'd like to suggest we hear a message from Mr. Michel David-Vey, Chairman of the Eurazeo Supervisory Board. Ladies and gentlemen, dear shareholders, this general meeting takes on a special character this year. The pandemic forces us to hold the meeting at the head office of our company without the physical presence of shareholders. We regret this. We're so happy every year to meet with you and to be able to bring together the whole Eurazeo family, its shareholders, its managers, its team members, its directors, managers, companies we support, and our partners. Ladies and gentlemen, dear shareholders, this crisis prevents me, like you, from being physically present at this meeting and chairing it, as I have had the pleasure of doing for over 20 years now. Mr. Jean-Charles Decaux, one of our vice chairmen of the supervisory board, who's present in Paris, has accepted to take over this year to chair the meeting, and I thank him very warmly for doing so. Nevertheless, I did want to give you this recorded message so I could speak to you. Every year, the general meeting is an opportunity for me to review with you the past year, discuss the economic environment in which Eurazeo has built its successes. You'll understand that given the terrible crisis the world is going through, I'll be more succinct today, and I will focus mainly on the year 2020 and the crisis we are going through. So let us quickly go back to 2019, which was a good year on the economic front. The United States experienced remarkable growth. In the rest of the world, indicators are also good in 2019, like France, where growth was clear and there was a definite recovery. As for developing countries, they continued seeing impressive growth rates. In our business, private equity, 2019 was marked by acquisition prices which appeared to us to be exaggerated, or at least very high. In that market environment, prudence and discipline were required. Our company continued in 2019 the implementation of its very active strategy of diversification of its businesses, its sources of income, and its geographies. Eurazeo acted with great financial discipline, which allowed it to maintain substantial headroom and margin for maneuver, enabling us to overcome any difficulties experienced now or in the future. The appearance of COVID-19 at the start of 2020 caused a very sharp drop in markets, which had experienced a high level of confidence in 2019. The consequences of this economic crisis are still difficult to measure with precision, but they'll be major. Mobilization must therefore be total to make possible a revival of the world economy. States and central banks will participate. Private equity will also play an active role. Eurazeo has obviously mobilized itself very strongly to support the companies in its portfolio and to enable them to better manage the effects of lockdown on their activity. Eurazeo, thanks to the mobilization of all of its employees, is working alongside the managers of our equity holdings, and we will continue to do so, be at their side in coming months to support them in the resumption of their activities. I'm convinced that our company is well equipped to face the exceptional situation we're contending with today. However, it's not possible to determine the duration of this nor the extent today. Some of the Eurazeo subsidiaries or equity holdings have requested state aid. We've complied with the recommendations of the French state. The supervisory board decided to cancel payment of the dividend for the year 2019. This amount will further strengthen the company's cash position and thus strengthen its solidity over the long term. I would like to again emphasize the great mobilization of Eurazeo, its supervisory board, the executive board, and all employees, as well as our entire company, as to the confidence we can have in the future of our company. Thank you very much for your loyalty to Eurazeo. I'm very confident, and I will have the great pleasure of meeting with you again in person in 2021. Michel, we would also like to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Dear shareholders, I'm very pleased to meet with you today. I would have preferred to meet with you in person as we have for the past 10 years. I hope you're in perfect health. I hope you and people close to you did not fall ill, and if they did, became well quickly. On behalf of the Eurazeo Group, on behalf of all of us, I'd like to thank the health caregivers that are in the front lines. I'd thank all people who expose themselves to this disease to provide essential services. I say thank you, one and all. It's an exceptional and unprecedented context. We are very much connected with our whole ecosystem. Our teams are highly mobilized. Our directors are highly present, very supportive during this period. They're all attending this AGM today. They're online with us. I say hello to them individually and as a group, and I thank them all as a group and individually. Our management teams are highly committed and responsive, and of course, together with you, our shareholders, you're always loyal. We're all pulling together. This is why it's such a great pleasure for me to meet with you today. We wanted to maintain this AGM at the slated date, 2 months after the beginning of lockdown. This is an opportunity for us to have an initial dialogue on the impact of the crisis on our business activities. We are very much convinced that shareholder democracy is a stabilizing factor and enhances performance. Shareholder democracy is being expressed digitally today. It's an opportunity for people far from Paris to take part in this annual general meeting. Also, it's a pleasure for us to have an opportunity to have discussions with you as every year. Of course, we'll field your questions that you've sent to us in writing. During the meeting, we will answer those questions. Philippe Audouin, CFO, and myself would like to share our beliefs with you as to the strengths and the assets Eurazeo has during this time of crisis. We're going to look at this at 3 levels. A short-term analysis. We'll say in the short term, the group is totally mobilized to take the operational decisions that must be taken for Eurazeo and its shareholders. Medium term, we are a sound, resilient group thanks to our business model that's diversified, that we've built for years, and it's never been more relevant than today. Then there's the long-term view. We are nimble. We're an entrepreneur. We're ready to move on any new opportunities as they arise. It's an exceptional situation. We have to be exceptionally mobilized. 360-degree mobilization to protect our employees and our company's employees, to take part in the national and international effort to fight the pandemic, as well as its social and economic consequences, to adapt our organization to this unprecedented situation and take the decisions that must be taken and shoulder responsibilities. We also must inform and reassure our stakeholders. The number one urgency is to ensure health security within this group, all the while guaranteeing continuity of operations. As of 17 March, we set up protective measures. People started working from home ahead of advance requirements made by the government. 100% of our teams working from home, thanks to the high quality of IT investments made over years. It was very natural for our teams to be able to shift to working from home. We did some centralizing. We tightened the coordination between the management committee and the executive committee so that we could prioritize things. We could be quick, make sure the command chain was quick and smooth and could be proactive. All of our teams were proactive. We put together lockdown plans in all of our subsidiaries. Eurazeo ordered 2 million masks to provide for physical resumption of activities when our employees came back to the offices, as well as the employees of our shareholders of our shareholdings where we have a majority stake. A second major principle of our action has been one of solidarity. Here as well, we can see the plus point of Eurazeo's diversification. We can coordinate, lend impetus through our various companies in the portfolios that cover all aspects of fighting this crisis. Health with Sequence, Paytor, C2S, Linvoge, and Doctolib. Or think of supporting health providers, LPCR, Grape, and Europcar. And lastly, economic and social considerations, United, Lumaps, Miro. Above and beyond these initiatives, an additional very significant commitment's been made, 10 million euros, earmarked by your group. This is a commitment to take into account this unprecedented crisis. Each of us must act in our own way. It's a commitment in line with our identity, our history, and our view of the role your company needs to have within society. We wanted this amount to have a direct, very specific impact. First of all, to fight the pandemic. That's why there's a donation of €1 million to Paris hospitals. Also to tackle social considerations. We're donating €1 million to SAMU Social and 500,000 euros to its American equivalent, the Bowery Mission. We're also supporting our own ecosystem. This is why €7 million will be spent to solve urgent social situations as they arise in our subsidiaries, and also we'll be purchasing products and services for charity purposes. We've already ordered 750,000 euros worth of sanitary solutions ordered through Sequence for Doctors Without Borders and the French Red Cross. This is a group project. We're all making a financial contribution to this. Our company, our directors, our managers, and our employees are all contributing. I thank them, each and every one of them, for their commitment as well as their generosity. The third action principle during this crisis, proximity, being close to all stakeholders as from the very beginning of lockdown. In these circumstances of an unprecedented exceptional crisis, communication is of paramount importance. Ongoing permanent communication with our companies to measure all the impacts, prioritize urgent matters, and take the right decisions for today as well as the future. We need to be communicating with our shareholders, our financial analysts, our private investors, giving updates, being fully transparent on known impact on our business, also to talk about unknown areas as well as opportunities. Lastly, communication with other players in the marketplace, joint shareholders, competitors, with whom we share information and good practices. Of course, ongoing operational support to our companies to detect all urgent social matters or public aid required and established in recent weeks, to activate and mobilize our networks within government authorities both in France and the United States. It's a dialogue with our companies which goes both ways. It's cross-cutting, cross-business, added to by various other initiatives. There's a digital platform which was established to share best practices. Urgent decisions, of course, were made in all of our companies, specifically on business continuity and cash, liquidity. In all of our 430 companies, decisions were made to maintain the largest number of production sites in production, in activity, with full optimal health protection, ensuring security of supply, and maintaining a flow of decisions that was quite smooth. Now, cash, preservation of cash. There was strict cost control, hiring freezes if necessary, and so forth. Syndicated credit lines were drawn preventively when that was deemed necessary. Now we've got dialogue with our financiers pertaining to refinancing and bank covenants.
Fourth principle of action in the crisis, responsibility. Eurazeo has a sound financial situation and solid fundamentals. Philippe Audouin, our CFO, will return to that in a few minutes. But the crisis that we're going through is of unequal in scale with uncertain consequences. We know neither duration nor the rebound capacity when we emerge from lockdown. Therefore, it is better to plan when we cannot fully assess to date. That's why several decisions have been taken for your group to reconcile solidity with prudence. A freeze on hires and spending containment, but we're not furloughing any staff. The caution draw of 400 million on our syndicated credit line and no recourse to public support scheme. The scrapping of the dividend was a particularly difficult decision that occurs after a very good year 2019 that should have been operationalized through an increase in the dividend of 20%, whereas several of our equity holding companies will call on public support. We decided to take this cancellation decision in accordance with government provisions. Philippe Audouin will return in greater detail on our overarching vision of shareholder return, which is essential. Ladies and gentlemen, dear shareholders, so much for the immediate mobilization of the group as soon as the crisis erupted. Now, midterm, it's too soon to assess the impacts exhaustively and with precision, but I'm firmly of the view that the model we built over several years will act as a stabilizer. This model is a highly diversified investment offering in businesses, sectors, geographies, means that we're less at risk with diversified revenue sources and less results volatility allows us to maintain, thanks to the balance sheet mastery of the long term and to guarantee to the group recurring and predictable revenue flows. Pillar one of this model is, of course, performance. And let us make no mistake, there is no resilience possible when cycles change if there has not been performance during the past year. This performance is directly linked to the strategy that has been deployed over many years, reflecting the quality of our investment choices and the underlying quality of our assets. For several decades now, we've been delivering performance and a solid reputation that we've been able to develop over the past few years. A management for third-party activities, and 2019 demonstrates the tangible results of this strategy. We don't yet know what the impacts of the crisis will be on our activities, but we do know that we are addressing the crisis on the basis of solid foundations that have been even further strengthened in 2019. Pillar two, stability and experience. Eurazeo is a family shareholdership guaranteed over time, a balance sheet that guarantees our independence, a management team that's been working together for many years and together has weathered cycles and crises, an investor identity that is responsible, pioneer and leader in CSR. This identity and experience are key strengths to weather this period. Pillar three is diversification. It is at the heart of Eurazeo's strategy for several years. More geographic and sectoral growth drivers, businesses with different risk profiles and differentiated maturities, complementary sources of revenues. These strategies serve a single ambition: de-risk our group and guarantee long-term performance. This model, championed by an integrated organization serving all our divisions, is an accelerator in times of growth. It's also a stabilizer in times of crisis. Shown here is our multi-specialist model and the relative weight of each of our four asset classes. There are two things that I'd like you to take away. 65% of the assets under management, the largest part of the balance sheet of Eurazeo, directly invested today in companies or in real estate assets. That's to say, in businesses with the highest value added that generate the greatest return and the most predictable. At the same time, we believe in the strong growth potential of our asset management activity towards private debt and secondary transactions. I'll return to that in due course. Second area, diversification. sectors of activities where we invest, thanks to our knowledge of the dynamics and the knowledge of each of the markets. In times of growth, we can focus our deal flow, that is the investment opportunities that we screen, towards sectors that we view as the most dynamic in a period of change in cycle. They're sources of resilience that can offset sectors that might be more impacted. Look today, industrial, digital, financial services, asset management, insurance, health, all these companies in our group are fully playing that role and are displaying far greater resilience. Conversely, companies linked to travel, hospitality, or tourism, seeing a significant impact for short-term. Consumer companies are, of course, impacted through their physical distribution challenges, but our digital distribution challenges are posting strong growth. Eurazeo Growth, launched in 2011, today accounts for 12%, 730 million euros of the group's net asset values. A fine illustration of the benefits of this diversification. The Eurazeo Growth are in very good shape, well capitalized with light cost structures. They intervene on markets that have not been too affected by the crisis. During the past weeks, at the heart of the lockdown, these companies are delivering revenue levels higher than at the same time last year, and several of them have in fact successfully raised new investment transactions, which demonstrates the appeal that these companies have. Managed to invest 150 million in these digital companies, and I welcome that. Another diversification angle is the global geographic exposure. Of course, it generates better business opportunities to forge strategic partnerships with international leaders, to be closer in supporting our private investors, but above all, it diversifies their economic exposure. We show the geographic split of the economic revenue. France, just over 40%, Europe, close on 30%, and the United States at 21%. We made a significant step forward in 2019 to increase our Asian presence through the partner that we've just concluded with CIC, the Chinese sovereign wealth fund. I welcome that. Pillar 4, predictability. As you know, 2/3 of the group's assets today at Eurazeo are managed for investors who are partners. We can welcome the record fundraising year with an increase of over 50% in 2019, 2.4 billion euros. This is a long-term commitment in closed funds that guarantee fees that are up for this year and over several years. This dynamic is obviously set to slow over the coming months because of the macro uncertainties, but there again, the diversity of our offering is an asset. We benefit from positive fundraising outlook for some of our funds, such as Eurazeo Growth that I mentioned a moment ago. Final pillar, discipline. Discipline in our investment decisions. First and foremost, the more diversified we are, the more selective. You see the volume of our business opportunities has grown by 30% over 1 year. For our capital, PME, patrimoine, and brands divisions, at the same time, we've opted to invest less. We're highly disciplined on the valuations and highly disciplined on the leverage level. Same discipline when it comes to operationalizing the value generated when we exit. Over the past 3 years, we've increased our disposals for a total amount of 3.9 billion euros in our balance sheet. We anticipated the best market moments to dispose of 5 assets in very good conditions in 2019: Smile, Neovia, Montclair, Ellis, and Sifa. Given the outlook going forward, we can congratulate ourselves having put these disposal deals behind us. This discipline, financial discipline, and very stringent management. Over to Philippe Audouin for the presentation of our 2019 accounts, and I'll come back to set out the longer term perspectives for our group. Thank you, Virginie. Shareholders, I'm going to want to take a rather special exercise this year to comment the 2019 figures, whereas the crisis is impacting the group and bringing up uncertainty. But the results for 2019 demonstrate tangibly the success of the strategy put in place by Eurazeo these past few years. Diversification results, stringent management to assets that will allow us to weather the current crisis. Before entering into the details of the figures, I'd like to underscore the key points. Asset management up to 18.8 billion euros, 16% increase. Fundraising, as mentioned by Virginie, 2.4 billion, up 53% over the previous year. Management fees up 16%, standing at 215 million. Portfolio value creation of 800 million euros in our portfolio. That's up 14.5%. A net asset value per share at 80.3 euros at the end of December. That's up 10.5%. As Virginie said, this year we achieved performance shown on screen that continued to strengthen your company. And of course, we maintain a strong balance sheet. Let's look first of all at our income statement. As you know, our income statement has three major components. Firstly, the contributions of the consolidated companies in our portfolio, and then the contribution of our investment activity, and lastly, the contribution of our asset management business. Now, the contribution of companies is up to 226 million euros. More about that performance in a moment. Then contribution of our investment activity is down to 107 as against 254 last year. This decrease is due to three factors. The first is a baseline effect, a lower volume of disposals than last year when we disposed of Asmodee, as you will recall. Second is an accounting non-economic impact. And amongst the disposals this year, there's the balance of our investment stake in Moncler. That holding was valued at fair value by results following its deconsolidation, and we only booked its value increase between the 1st of January 2019, the 20th of March, the date at which it was actually disposed of. And then third factor, we booked a global impairment of 196 million. Impairment essentially reflects the Europe car value adjustment at 4.5 euros per share to reflect the decline of its share price during 2019. Lastly, third part of our income statement, the contribution of our asset management business that is up sharp 79 million to 124 million euros. This increase stems from the increase in management fees, those that are invoiced to our third-party investors, up 19% at 140 million euros. These management fees that are recurring and predictable over time appropriately supplement the less regular capital gains by definition. That's one of the benefits of our model. At the foot of the P&L, the expenses are calculated down 174, 25 million for tax, and non-recurring items are down 136 million, made up essentially of restructuring costs and costs linked to M&A activity that's across the companies in our portfolio. All in all, Our net income group share stands at 123 million euros against 273 million last year. Let's look now at the contribution of our business units to our result in greater detail. Shown here is the economic figure, EBITDA on the left, and for each of our business units on the right for 2019. All in all, the economic revenue of the group is up 8.8%, and economic EBITDA of 8.4% on the year at constant Eurazeo scope. Let me remind you that the revenue and EBITDA economic are made up of the consolidated revenue plus our proportional share of the revenue and EBITDAs of companies consolidated by the equity method. Across the whole portfolio, we've seen an acceleration in the second half with an increase in the economic revenue of 10.3% in the first half as against 7.4% in EBITDA, up 13% in the second half as against 3.8%. All our business units contributed positively, both to top line growth as well as EBITDA growth. Let's now look at value creation within our portfolio during the course of 2019. 14.5% calculated across the portfolio, excluding the impact of listed securities, notably Europcar. Value creation on the unlisted portfolio was very strong, coming in at 19%. All our business units contributed to this sound result. They're all above 15% value creation on their unlisted portfolio. Value creation of Eurazeo growth, 29%, deserves to be commended. The volatility of listed securities is important. Financial markets tend to amplify the trends both upwards and downwards, and this source of volatility within our portfolio nevertheless reduced sharply going forward. Listed securities at December 23rd represent less than 4% of our NAV, and the unlisted over 96%. Eurazeo Development, comprising our management activity for third party, Idinvest, Rhône, MCH, essentially based on recurring and predictable management fees, already accounts for 16% of our net asset value. Let's look at our assets under management. They're sharply up 16% to 18.8 billion euros. This sharp increase comes from the successful fundraising in 2019, sharply up over 2018 at 2.4 billion as against 1.6 billion, up 53%, and also the global value creation in the investments for 1.3 billion euros. We can note that fundraising with 2.4 billion is markedly higher than the distributions that stood at 1.9 billion. The good results allow us to post an increase in NAV of 10.5% restated for the dividend. Our cash position with an average level of 619 million across the year 2019, as investment doesn't generate much of a return, weighs a little bit on the growth of NAV per share. But as you know, Eurazeo has always sought to preserve a strong financial situation. That's of course the case today. Today, it more than ever represents a real strength for Eurazeo.
It's interesting to observe at the bottom of this page a change in the discount between our share price and the overall stock market. Average discount was 31% between 2011 and 2013. Gradually, it reduced to reach 12% between 2017 and 2019. The reduction in the discount is a reflection of the appropriateness of the strategic decisions made in recent years, particularly development of management for third parties. So the current NAV, is it relevant today? Probably not. As every year, We give an updated NAV when we publish our financials. So far, considering the uncertainties as to the length and conditions of exiting this crisis, we cannot determine the specific impact of this on our NAV. 5 analyst studies have been published since the beginning of the crisis regarding Eurazeo. Of course, we can't confirm the results of those studies, but they may serve as a benchmark. You have them on the screen. According to these studies, our average NAV would be 64 euros, down versus our 31st December publication. This target NAV established by the analysts, mainly through referring to changes in listed markets and increases in risk premiums, doing a weighting based on business sector. Our share price went down by 25% since the beginning of the year. This means that our discount has grown again. It's around 28% currently. Considering the significance of that discount, 4 of the 5 recommendations on our share price are buy or accumulate. Eurazeo is a robust group. This is clearly very important in the current circumstances. During my professional life, I've seen several economic crises. They've all been different, but there are always some things that don't change. The first thing that doesn't change, during a crisis, almost everybody feels the impact. But after the crisis, the stronger ones are even stronger, the weakest ones have either disappeared or are further weakened. This is why we're imposing on ourselves this great financial strictness, as Virginie said, both at Eurazeo and our companies. To talk about Eurazeo, the figures you see on the screen show the strength of our structure, its soundness. We began the year with just over 500 million euros in available cash and no structural debt in our company's company balance sheet. We have the benefits of a syndicated credit line of 1 billion euros. We increased by 50% and also renewed in December of 2019. So it's fully available. Maturity 5 years, 2 options to extend by 1 year, reaching potentially 7 years. Plus, all of the commitments by our partner investors. It's available amounts representing 3.8 billion euros. The quality and diversity of our assets are real plus points. To better understand the potential impact of the crisis on our companies, we've ranked these into 4 categories. The first category are the resilient activities, representing around 35 to 40% of our net asset value. These are companies that aren't feeling much of a short-term impact of the crisis due to a high level of recurring revenue or limited exposure to the consequences of the epidemic. These are companies in the medicines sector, digital platforms, solar farms, or group asset management entities, as mentioned previously. The second category we've deemed, these are companies that indirectly or cyclically feel the impacts of lockdown. They make up 20 to 25% of our NAV. Think of B2B service businesses that may continue some of their work from home, or think of some types of schools and other types of housing. There's a third category. These are companies that feel the direct impact of a large-scale lockdown. We feel, however, they should be able to resume activities fairly quickly after lockdown is eased. This group of companies make up 15 to 20% of our NAV. They tend to be consumer-related businesses and those that welcome the public. The fourth category of companies, those that are directly impacted by lockdown, whose subsequent resumption may be slower or more gradual. They're 20 to 25% of our NAV. These include companies, of course, that are exposed to travel and other types of leisure activities. This is the categorization we've established based on the assumption of a gradual exiting of lockdown in various geographies throughout May. Our portfolio includes a very significant part of companies that are either highly resilient under category 1, or whose impact should be fairly measured, category 2, or those companies who we feel will be able to resume business fairly quickly. That's category 3, even though we don't expect there'll be a quick uptick in business for them. In terms of companies in our portfolio, a large majority of them should be able to continue their activities thanks to their cash on hand, possibly added to through own existing financing lines that most of them have at their own level. As to other portfolio companies, we'll be able to provide them with selective support to assist them to cope with this very unusual period. We've already assisted 2 of our companies, including Europcar, even though we're a minority shareholder in terms of share capital and governance. Eurazeo very much shouldered its responsibility as a shareholder and committed to provide support under an overall financing plan at the side of banks and public government authorities. Eurazeo is the only Europcar shareholder that made that effort. Lastly, a last section of my talk on Eurazeo and our shareholders. Let's begin by talking about share prices. In recent months, last 18 or so months, the beginning of 2019 got off to a good start. Our share price went up 18% up to October. Then Eurazeo was impacted by a securities placement that had a negative impact on the share price between mid-October and the beginning of January. After that, toward the beginning of the year, the share price, this is up until 10 February, our share price went back up quite well. It grew by 9%. Before then going back down, as the entire stock market did, due to the impact of the current crisis. Over the longer term, since 2013, i.e. The period that began after the end of the previous crisis, the Eurazeo shareholder reaped a total return of 96% in spite of the recent downturn versus 57% increase in the CAC 40 stock exchange index. That clearly testifies to the strength of our business model. Let's talk about our dividend now. As our loyal shareholders know, and I'm sure that many of you are listening to us today, Eurazeo has always paid out a dividend. On average, it's increased by 6.7% per year over a long period between 2003 and 2019. The Executive Board on 12 March 2020 proposed a dividend of 1.50 euros per share, up 20%. That would have been for 2019. But among other things, due to government regulations in this unprecedented context, we had to decide to amend the resolution having to do with the appropriation of earnings and not allocate the dividend initially scheduled. But there's a proposal to establish a dividend increased by 10%, rewarding shareholders that have held registered shares for at least a 2-year period in the legal under legal requirements. We've maintained that proposal for the dividend, that 10% increase. We can tell you this is a time that's not visible at all, and Eurazeo wanted to be closer than ever before to its shareholder during this time, in spite of health constraints weighing upon us all. So we've decided to opt for new digital tools so that you can get the best possible information. First and foremost, we just announced a new app that can be downloaded on Android and the App Store, so you can get real-time information on key information in major Eurazeo events, such as this shareholders meeting, which is being broadcast live. Next, we also designed a new formula, a streamlined event, a web conference for quarterly and half-yearly financials. We did this for the first time on March 12th. This was really successful. 8 times more of you connected to this versus the previous edition. Lastly, to be even closer to our major potential investors and our major shareholders, in recent weeks, we conducted many meetings by telephone or video. These were virtual roadshows we organized. Of course, we'll be continuing with this throughout the year. By way of conclusion, I'd say we continue to be cautious but confident in our ability to weather this crisis. Our teams are fully mobilized at every level. Thanks to the financial and especially human support we're providing to group companies, we feel it's probable all of our companies will weather the crisis well, and probable many of them will benefit from an improved competitive environment after the crisis. Thank you very much. I'd like to give the floor to the next speaker. Thank you very much, Philippe. I'd like to briefly summarize our view of Eurozare's situation in the longer term. Our approach, briefly, is one of caution, prudence, confidence, and assertiveness. We're prudent in terms of health considerations, finance, investment activities. We're confident in our financial solidity, the strength and performance of our model. Assertiveness, we want to be agile, nimble, benefit from the diversity of our growth engines so that we can move on new opportunities as they arise. We also intend to be very much part and parcel of the reconfigured social and economic arena, which will necessarily take place over the next few months. In terms of the general economy, we can just talk about various assumptions based on information we have today. As to the negative points, a simultaneous shock in supply and demand. In terms of supply, we're seeing reduced business, we're seeing dropping investments, drastic cuts, jobs being lost in long short term. In terms of demand, we're seeing dwindling income, reduced consumption, and postponed purchases. But on the positive side, coordinated action, immediate action, large-scale action by central banks, similar to action in 2008, supported by increased market liquidity. Retail banking in the US and in Europe are on a more stable footing today than previously. They've got more shareholder equity than previously. Governments have also taken emergency measures, which were very important to provide company bankruptcies and any collapse in demand and any social crisis. So what consequences can Eurazeo as an investor draw from all of this? What conclusions can we draw? First of all, not many activities in terms of investments or divestments in the first half of 2020. It's possible there will be more opportunities in the second half of 2020 or in the course of 2021. In terms of return in non-listed, returns there will be more attractive than in listed portfolios. Investors will be reevaluating asset allocations and risk profiles, taking into account the current crisis. There will be a 6 to 9 month offset postponement we can expect when it comes to fundraising. Lastly, we need to continue with our cautious management of treasury and continue boosting cash on hand. Thanks to the great quality of our assets, and as Philippe said, most of our businesses and investments will continue their activities thanks to their cash on hand and financing lines. Our financial structure is sound. We've got a strong balance sheet. We can provide some of them with additional support temporarily if need be. Our model is financially sound and strong and operational, very nimble. That's all the reason for diversification. Eurazeo is strategically concentrated, but its teams are operationally decentralized, very close to their markets, ready to move on any opportunity. I've got a firm belief that this period has already created and will create further opportunities. We mentioned the digital world earlier. There'll be digital opportunities. Think of private debt. There'll be very attractive opportunities here. Buying back senior debt at a discount for many companies that are highly robust. In terms of secondary transaction markets, it's highly likely there'll be discounted sales of fund shares after the crisis. Investors may want to rebalance their asset allocations at that juncture. In all three of these markets, we've got teams that are among the leading teams in Europe in terms of experience and resources. Eurazeo must remain and will remain, regardless of the environment, a company of entrepreneurs. We must also continue to be a responsible company. This crisis has had and will continue to have social repercussions. It raises question marks as to location of activities, resilience of economic ecosystems, efficiency of public structures, government structures. It's my belief the economic world must play an increased role in the reconfiguration of the subsequent world. Private equity is going to be more and more in the front lines because currently it represents between 5 and 10% of GDP in Europe and the United States because on average it generates company growth that's 3 times greater than the rest of the economy and generates more jobs. In this context, Eurazeo has often been pioneering among our peers in various areas such as CSR, company and social responsibility, inclusion, governance, environmental kindness. On all these subjects, we've been regularly audited. Our CSR strategy was audited from 2015 to 2020. All the audits have shown that our results were better than our initial targets, and I'm especially proud of all those results. We've intended to further speed this up, this strategy, in future years. We're even more convinced than ever before during this crisis. Zero net carbon emissions in 2020, more good governance, more gender equality and equity, more inclusion, more adherence to CSR in all of our companies. These are objectives. Some other companies may think these might be of secondary importance during the crisis. We think precisely the opposite. In conclusion, three major messages that we'd like to convey to you today. Eurazeo and its companies are fully mobilized. Eurazeo has the strategy, the financial model, and the resources, as well as the experience to act, to stabilize these companies, have a stabilizing effect on the companies and society as a whole. Regardless of the economic environment, Eurazeo will continue to be an entrepreneur, innovative, active, to move on opportunities when they arise. You know, your support, your listening to us, is very important to us, and I thank you for your support. I'd like to give the floor now. It's a recording to Mr. David Clerot from the PricewaterhouseCoopers firm to report to us on the work by the statutory auditors for 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. The statutory auditors issued 4 reports, which all appear in the registration document, which has been filed with the financial market authorities by your group. 3 reports relate to the ordinary general meeting, and 1 report concerns the extraordinary meeting. On the first slide, we mention that our first 2 reports have to do with the company financial statements and consolidated financial statements that appear respectively on pages 295 and 328 of the Universal Registration Document. Your management board approved the annual and consolidated financial statements of your group drawn up in compliance with French accounting principles and IFRS standards. We certify that these financial statements agree with a true and fair view of the result of the financial year, as well as the financial situation and the assets and liabilities of your company and your group. On the next slide, in application of the provisions of the Commercial Code, our reports present the key audit points, which in our opinion were the most important for the audit of the annual and consolidated accounts for the financial year, as well as the audit responses that we brought. The key points of the audit are presented in detail in our reports. As you can see on the screen, there are 2 of these for the company annual financial statements and 4 for the consolidated financial statements. These key audit points were discussed in detail with your group's management and with its audit committee. On the next slide, our third report has to do with regulated conventions and commitments as outlined on page 396 of the Universal Registration Document. In this report, we present to you for each agreement or commitment the nature of the agreement, the interest of the agreement for your company, the financial conditions attached to these agreements, and the legal entities and or natural persons concerned. Next slide now. In the first part, we indicate the agreements that have been previously authorized by your supervisory board and which are subject for your approval. This year, 3 new agreements are subject for your approval. In summary, they relate to the amendment to the CARICO Croissance 3 co-investment program, the amendment to the 2015-2018 co-investment program, the variable compensation of the members of the executive board for the financial year 2019 benefiting from an employment contract. Now, to the next slide. We mentioned in the second part of our report, we recall, first, the agreements that you've already approved during previous AGMs without execution during the past financial year. Secondly, the agreements already approved during the general meeting of April 25th, 2019. On the last slide, we mentioned that for the extraordinary meeting, we have no comments to make on the information given in the Executive Board's report on the authorizations and plan transactions. The financial conditions under which the issue would be carried out were not fixed. We do not express an opinion on them or on the possible proposal for cancellation of the preferred subscription right. We will prepare an additional report, if necessary, when these authorizations are used by your management board. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Clairaut. I now invite Nicolas Huet, Company Secretary, to present the work of the Supervisory Board in 2019. So I'll briefly outline the work undertaken by the Supervisory Board and its committees during the year. First of all, the composition of your board shown on the screen. It's comprised of 15 members, 2 non-voting members, 7 independent members, 54%, 2 employee representatives, Viviane Akrish appointed early 2019, and 6 women, 46% of the headcount. Current diversity of profiles is a result of the work undertaken, and we're satisfied that the Supervisory Board brings together leading figures with international experience acquired in different countries, proven in various business sectors, investment, leading of international companies, but also, for example, governance, listed companies, CSR, digital. The terms of office of board members due to expire shown on screen have all been proposed for renewal by the committee and by the board. Madame Victoire de Margerie, Mr. Jean-Charles Decaux, Monsieur Georges Posset, Monsieur Roland Dulliard are standing for renewal. You know these figures. Their full profile is to be found in our registration document in the convening notice. It will be described in due course when we come to the resolutions. As you know, the Supervisory Board exercised permanent control of the company by the Executive Board, devotes a lot of time determining the company's strategic priorities, reviewing major investment and divestment projects, as well as governance. During the course of 2019, aside from discussions linked from major investments and divestments, the board addressed the global strategy, discussing on balance sheet allocation between the various divisions of the group in light of business plan scenarios. Furthermore, the work in 2019 include the review of the new CSR strategy to be unveiled soon, mentioned by Virginie, changes to the compensation policy of corporate officers, or yet again, the short and medium-term succession plan in accordance with the business code. A formal assessment of the board and the committees was undertaken earlier in the year, and that gives to a description in the registration document. Now, in 2019, the Supervisory Board met 7 times versus 5 times in 2018. Average attendance rate in excess of 93%, 10 points more than in 2018. Supervisory Board assisted, as you know, in its decisions by 5 permanent specialized committees that met a total of 18 times during 2019. On screen, you have the excellent attendance rates of these committees. The new latest committee, a digital committee set up in October, will begin its work in 2020. So much for the work of your Supervisory Board and committees in 2019. Thank you for your attention. And let's now follow Mr. Georges Posset, Chairman of Compensation, Appointment and Governance Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, dear shareholders, good afternoon. In these very exceptional circumstances and without having the pleasure of being physically in attendance, I'm going to present to you a summary of the work of the Compensation, Appointment and Governance Committee. Let's look at the composition of this committee. 6 members, 3 independents, chaired by an independent. I'd begin by thanking committee members for their assiduous presence and their very constructive contribution to our work during 2019 and Q1 2020. The composition and the work of this committee, together with those of the other Supervisory Board committees, had just been presented. Over and above compensation matters that I'll come to in a moment, our committee sought to track the implementation of our governance, improvements identified during the review of the Supervisory Board and its committees undertaken in 2018. Turning now to fixed compensation of executive board members, you'll note that they've remained unchanged in 2019 as compared to 2018, and they're not set to change over a 3-year interval. Let's look now at the variable compensation of executive board members for 2019, described in detail in your registration document with the attained percentages, as you can see on screen. The amounts to be received in respect of 2019 are down as compared to last year, owing to the relative underperformance of certain quantitative criteria, NAV versus the CAC 40. The CAC 40 posted very marked growth in 2019. Let me add that as part of the solidarity effort undertaken by Eurazeo in the COVID-19 crisis, executive board members pledged to pay 10% of this variable compensation to charities supported by the company. Stock options, performance shares, the conditions for the granting and vesting of stock options and performance shares have not been changed during the year and will be so for the allocations as of January 2020. More about that in due course. In 2019, board members received allocations representing the equivalent of 6 to 8 months of their total compensation. In line with previous allocations, they all opted for reference shares. The details are to be found in the registration document. As regards 2020 compensation policy, by way of illustration of what I said in my introduction on the constant improvement of governance and mode of compensation of executive officers, we continued our work to adapt the compensation of executive directors. The discretionary criteria represented 15% of the target bonus will now be linked to the attainment of criteria defined in the CSR strategy, the implementation of said CSR strategy, and the way the executives have adapted in their environment, taking into account the comments or observation made by third-party agencies, and we have overhauled the long-term compensation conditions for the long-term incentive plan as described on screen and more extensively in the registration document. These conditions are far more exacting than in the past and mix items of performance specific to Eurazeo, the increase in the NAV that is a value creation metric over the medium term, and other criteria pertaining to the markets and peers. These are the main items that I wish to present to you regarding compensation, selection, and governance. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Georges. We're now pleased to move to the answers to shareholders' questions received in writing. Some of your questions were addressed in our respective presentations. Others have received written answers to be found on our website, and the last category will now be addressed at this point in time. Over to Nicolas, who will handle the Q&A. Thank you. First question, Philippe. Our company strives to improve relations with retail shareholders. Does it plan a physical meeting with them before the end of the year? Well, thanks for that question. Indeed, as you know, interaction with our retail shareholders is very important for Eurazeo. It's really at the heart of our shareholder strategy. Every year we organize several meetings with retail shareholders in Paris and in the provinces, and 2020 is going to be no exception. But of course, health constraints upon us today have led us to review our schedule, and the meetings that we plan to hold in the first half are being postponed into the second half. We're waiting to have a clearer view of the situation as we emerge from the lockdown to confirm the schedule of meetings, but they are indeed planned in the second half of the year. Second question, won't shareholders suffer from a double jeopardy? No dividend this year because of the anticipated impact, and reduced or zero dividend next year because of the actual impact of the crisis. Good question. To pay out a dividend, you need two things in a company. You need distributable reserves, you need cash. Now, we have extensive reserves to pay out a dividend, as we do year after year. Our dividend isn't calculated as a percentage of earnings. As to cash, we said Eurazeo is a strong group, but we'll have to review the situation early next year in light of the support that we will have provided to our companies and investment opportunities that we may have seized during this propitious period. Third question, Philippe, concerning cost containment. What was the cost of the booking of the Pavillon Gabriel, which was the place where this meeting was due to be held? That's a good question. We paid a deposit to the Pavillon Gabriel of just under 150,000 euros as the venue for our AGM. We wanted to maintain our commitment with our service provider in this period of crisis. And so that deposit is not lost. It will be fully carried over for a forthcoming event, either this year or next year, when we hold our next AGM that I hope we will be able to hold physically. Fourth question, Eurazeo announced that it was going to embark on a strategic review regarding its stake in Europcar. Is this still on the cards? Well, Eurazeo has been a shareholder of Europcar since May 06. That's 14 years as majority shareholders up until June 2015, and subsequently as a minority shareholder. We need to acknowledge that because there are a few shareholders such as us who are capable of supporting over 14 years a company. Indeed, we announced to the market at the end of last year that we had a strategic review underway regarding the future of our stake within Eurazeo. So we initiated discussions with a number of investors who were interested to continue to support the growth of Europcar post Eurazeo. But given the current economic climate, more specifically the lack of visibility going forward, this process was placed on hold, and discussions will be able to resume when we have a clearer view on the economic outlook for Europcar. Fifth question, slightly more legal, that I'll try and answer. Will Eurazeo in the future be able to change the formulation of the part of Resolution 21 through a possibility to an obligation to subscribe to preserve the interests of existing shareholders? It'll be difficult to implement that change. Why? Because this resolution aims case of public exchange offers, which most time take place with new shareholders who are not existing shareholders of Eurazeo. And so it can only be an option to subscribe. We can't make mandatory the subscription of existing shareholders. So unfortunately, we can't answer that favorably. Sixth question, Virginie Mordon indicated a few years ago that your presence in the US would be temporary. What's the situation? Is now not the time to return to Eurazeo's head office? Well, my move is indeed planned for this year, for 2020. And so it'll come into effect in a few months' time for after the summer break in September. Since my appointment of the head of the management board in 2018, I've of course rebalance the time spent between France and the US, but I will be back in France, in Paris, over the coming months. Now, the decision, as you'll recall, that we took in 2016 to establish, to build for Eurazeo a base for expansion in a very attractive market in the US. I wanted to lead that effort to get involved personally, and it was on that occasion 4 years ago that I moved to the United States with the two partners from Eurazeo Capital. Over the past 4 years, undeniably, we're able to build up Eurazeo in the United States. We built up a high quality team, established a reputation with partners, investors, players of this US ecosystem. Today, over 1 billion has been invested in the United States in 8 companies, 3 by Eurazeo Capital and 5 by Eurazeo Brands, launched 2 years ago now. And of course, very significant strategic partnerships such as that with our friends from Rhone in the United States and of course in Europe. So not only am I extremely satisfied with what has been accomplished and built with these major efforts and talents that we have in the United States, a team of about 20 investors between Eurazeo Brands and Eurazeo Capital. So today, I feel that I can come back to France, and of course, you'll appreciate that I'll continue to spend some time in the US to expand our development. That's it for the questions that we can respond to orally. As Virginie said, there are answers to other questions that have been given in accordance with regulatory provisions, and this brings to an end the discussion. Over to Nicolas Huet for the resolutions and the result of the vote on our resolutions. Well, we have a great many resolutions to address this year. We have 30 resolutions, 19 for the ordinary meeting, 11 for the extraordinary meeting. The full text of these resolutions are to be found in the document. Given that all the votes were expressed before this meeting, for each resolution, I'll give you the result obtained. First resolution concerns the approval of the company financial statements December 31st, 2019. This resolution is adopted by 99.99%. Resolution number 2 concerns the allocation of net income presented on screen. As Philippe Audouin said, total net income will be allocated in full to retained earnings with no dividend paid out. This resolution is adopted 99.97%. Third resolution concerns the approval of the consolidated financial statements at the end of 2019. This resolution adopted 99.99%. Fourth resolution and concerns the approval of regulated agreements that are set out in the special reports of the auditors that David Clairot mentioned earlier in this presentation. This resolution is adopted 80.07%. Before turning to the resolutions regarding the renewals of terms of office, I think Virginie wishes to say, well, yes, so the renewal of the term of 4 board members of your company was put to your vote this year. 4 very complementary backgrounds that brings their skills, expertise, and competence to your board. And I wish to have a special word for each of them. Jean-Charles Decaux, Vice Chair of the Board, President of Decaux, one of the economic flagships of our country, who brings his perspective as a business leader, very international experience, his insights of digitization issues that are so crucial for our companies, ongoing committed support, great stringency, key for the work of the board and the strategic expansion of the company.
Then Georges Pauget, chairman of the Compensation Committee. You heard from him earlier, one of the most knowledgeable persons in France in finance and banking. He's an economist. He's got great experience in charge of the Crédit Agricole during the 2008 crisis. These are rare assets we have for our group during such a period. Victoire de Margerie, with tremendous energy, knowledge of industry, the questions of transformation and international vision. Her professional judgment, and we looked at projects of investment, has been very useful, very beneficial for all of our teams. Roland Duluard, past senator, president of the département and mayor. Roland Duluard brings to us his knowledge in regulatory areas, rules and regulations governing the economy, as well as his great experience in the French industrial fabric. I thank them, one and all, each and every one of them, for their contribution to the success of your company. Let's begin with Resolution 5. Here we're proposing to renew for a period of 4 years the mandate of Mr. Jean-Charles Decaux. You can see his profile on the screen. Jean-Charles Decaux sits on the Supervisory Board as Vice Chairman since June 2017, also takes part in the work of the Finance Committee. This appointment is approved, and you can see the figures before you on the screen. I'd also specify that many of the votes given against the resolution are due to some recommendations by some vote advisors who talked about a 75% attendance rate wouldn't be sufficient. We feel that's highly regrettable. The 2 absences of Jean-Charles Decaux in 2019, made up for by his great attendance at Finance Committee meetings, was due to some previous appointments that he had in the JC Decaux SA company, and in no way questions his exemplary participation, as Virginie said. Resolution 6, we propose to renew the term of Georges Pauget for a period of 4 years. Mr. Georges Pauget, member of the Supervisory Board since 2010, chaired the Compensation and Governance Committee since 2019, and participates in the Audit Committee. His appointment is approved, and we can see the figures on the screen. Resolution 7, the mandate of Madame Victoire de Margerie. We're proposing to renew this for 4 years. You can see the main activities on the screen. Victoire de Margerie, member of the Supervisory Board since 2012 and participates in the work of the Finance Committee. Her appointment is approved. We see the figures on the screen. Resolution 8, we propose that you renew, again for a period of 4 years, the mandate of Mr. Roland Duluard, former Vice President of the Senate. Roland Duluard has been accompanying Eurazeo since 2004, member of the Compensation Committee, the CSR Committee, and soon he will be member of the Digital Committee when it begins its work. His appointment is approved. We see the figures on the screen. Resolutions 9 and 10. The Supervisory Board submits for your approval 2020 compensation policy for members of the Supervisory Board and the Executive Board. This policy is presented in detail in our universal registration document. Its changes were described to you earlier by Mr. Georges Pauget. These resolutions are approved. We can see the figures on the screen. Both of them can be seen in the screen. Pursuant to Regulations 11 to 16, we propose that you approve the elements of compensation paid or awarded to each executive director for 2019 fiscal year, as well as the report on the compensation for all executive officers. As every year, you will find the details in the summary tables and the notice to attend this meeting. 11th resolution, first in this report. The resolution is approved. We see the percentage here. Resolution 12, relating to compensation in 2019 for Mr. David Veil. Resolution is adopted. We see the figure. Resolution 13, pertaining to compensation 2019 of Ms. Virginie Morgan. It's approved. We see the figure. Resolution 14, compensation for Mr. Philippe Audouin. Resolution is approved. We see the percentage. Resolution 15 has to do with 2019 compensation for yours truly. Approved. Finally, the 16th resolution relates to 2019 compensation for Mr. Olivier Millet. The resolution is approved. We see the percentage on the screen, same percentage. Under Resolution 17, we propose to renew for the 4-year period the mandate of the statutory auditor of PricewaterhouseCoopers Price has been at our side since 1995. The resolution is approved. We see the percentage. Resolution 18 now, to renew the authorization of a share buyback program within the legal limits in force, up to 10% of capital. You see the characteristics of the program on the screen. The resolution is approved. Now let's move on to the extraordinary resolutions. You're therefore invited to vote on the resolutions allowing for each of the following operations, the main characteristics of which are shown on the screen. First of all, capital increases by inclusion of reserves, as well as issues of securities with preferential subscription rights maintained. First two resolutions adopted. We see these percentages on the screen. Next come delegations, authorizations allowing issuing of securities without preferential subscription rights in the context of public offer or a public exchange offer, under 21, or in the context of private placement, for the amounts and according to the terms shown on the screen. The two resolutions are adopted. We see the percentages. We see those two. We then propose to, this is Resolution 23, to authorize the Executive Board to freely set the issue price of securities without preferential subscription rights up to a limit of 10% of the share capital and with a maximum discount of 10% compared to the last market price. The resolution is adopted. Resolution 24, we ask you to authorize the implementation of an oversubscription, a green shoe, if this capital increase is oversubscribed with a limit of 15% of the initial issue. This resolution is adopted. We see the figure. Lastly, we ask you to allow us to issue shares or securities giving access to the capital in order to remunerate compensations in kind made to the company, and this within the limit of 10% of the capital. This resolution is adopted. Resolution 26. These are various authorizations and delegations, with the exception of the first, relating to the capitalization of reserves, will be governed by an overall limit of the amount of issues, 110 million euros, approximately 46% of the company's shareholder equity, with a sub-ceiling of 24 million euros for capital increases without DPS. Issues of securities representing receivables will be limited to 1 billion euros. The resolution is adopted, as we can see on the screen. I point out these proposals include maintaining the principle of neutrality of governance bodies during periods of public offer. The following resolutions relate to some statutory amendments due to deregulations. Thus, under the 27th resolution, we ask you first of all to allow the Supervisory Board to take certain decisions by written consultation. This resolution is approved. We see the percentage on the screen. The 28th resolution will allow us to insert in our statutes the stipulations allowing us by 2023 to pay out an increased dividend for shareholders registered, as explained earlier by Mr. Philippe Audouin. The resolution is approved. We see the percentage. Resolution 29 allows us to comply to make our statutes comply with new regulations. Without a doubt, the main amendment is inserting into our statutes, in line with the PACT Law 2019, taking into account social and environmental issues in the conduct of our activities. This resolution is adopted. We see the percentage. Lastly, Resolution 30, power to complete customary formalities. This is adopted. We see the percentage. I thank you for your attention. Ladies and gentlemen, dear shareholders, we've now completed this general meeting. I'd like to very warmly thank you for taking part, and thank you also for your trust. We'll meet again in 2021 for the AGM, we hope in physical presence, seeing each and every one of us.